San and Wolves is actually named after a Hayao Miyazaki film, Princess Mononoke. So when I named it San and Wolves, it kind of started as a joke because I didn't know San and Wolves Bakeshop was going to be a business. But a lot of people think my name is San. I'll be in the streets and they'll be like, hey, San. And I'm just like, no, my name is Kym. Hi, my name is Kym Estrada and I own San and Wolves Bakeshop. We're a vegan Filipino bakery based out of Long Beach, California. The reason why we're vegan is because I've been vegan since high school and I kind of weighed off of having Filipino food when I became vegan because there's not a lot of vegan options and I'm not the best cook, especially Filipino food. There's a lot of flavors and a lot of spices that go into it. It's really hard to make. And when I asked my mom, how do you make this? She'd be like, oh, just like a handful of this, a pinch of this. And it's just like based on feel. And so what I wanted to do was to show that we can still be vegan and still have our culture's food. And so my first thing that I veganized was actually this thing called pan de coco. Pan de coco uses a pandesal recipe, which is what we're making today. Pandesal is a sweet bread. So that's why we have the sugar here. So there's going to be a sugar, and then we're going to roll in breadcrumbs. We have salt, which is very important for pandesal since it's bread of salt. And then we're going to be using instant yeast. You can use activated dry yeast at home, but instant yeast is just easier to rely on since you can mix it in with your dries. And then for our milk, we're going to be using coconut milk. It's usually used with dairy milk. I like coconut milk a lot in my recipes. We don't use nuts or soy in our recipes just because there's hella Filipinos with allergy issues. And so to combat that and make it friendly for everybody, we use coconut milk. It doesn't show up too brightly, especially in this Pandesal recipe. And then we have our Violife butter. Back at the bakery, we use our own butter, but for this purpose, we will be using Violife, which is a good alternative. So I have all my dries and my liquid ingredients set up, measured out. This is going to be the bread flour and this is the AP flour. So you could just go ahead and start adding all the dry ingredients to your mixing bowl. And if you don't have a mixing bowl, you could also do this by hand and I'll guide you guys along that. So we just put in the bread flour and now we're gonna put in the AP flour. It's half AP and half bread flour. And then you add in your sugar too. All right. And then you add in your yeast, your instant yeast. And then I don't like the yeast interacting with the salt just yet. So I move the stuff around inside, the dries around, and then I add the salt last. And then I just mix the dries a little bit more. Have that mixed a little bit. All right. This is a super simple recipe. It's an enriched bread dough, which means it uses more than just water, flour, and salt. So we're using butter, and we're using milk, and we're using sugar. So you can add in the water and the milk at this point now. And you want to make sure the water and both the milk are warm to allow the yeast to activate. All right, so I think we have all the liquids in. And then we have our softened butter. This has been out for about 2 hours, so it's softened. So we're gonna add that as the last ingredient once we get dough going. So you want to set it on a slow speed first, just so it's incorporated. So pandesal is usually eaten for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's a Filipino staple. We eat it with our coffee. We eat it as a replacement for rice. We eat it as a sandwich, whatever you want to do with it. It's basically always good to have a fresh pack of pandesal with you. Yeah, so now it's forming, it's becoming one piece. We just need to let it go for a little bit longer so all the flour gets incorporated inside. I think halfway we're going to scrape down the sides. All right, I'm just gonna scrape down the sides because there's fragments. So once the dough has become all formed and most of the flours are incorporated in the dough, you can go ahead and add in your slices of butter. I sliced it up in the beginning just so it could soften it quicker. I'm gonna put in half now and then half later. All right, I think that's about half. Then you can start it up again. Because this batch is bigger, we need it to incorporate first. Because if you put in too much, the dough will deflate, or it might deflate. And it's just better to put in half now, half later. My lid, I jigsawed it so like my mixer can go with the lid off. So what I do is while it's going, I just add little by little. So now we let this go for about 10 to 15 minutes, let the gluten develop. It's going to be stronger. And Pandesal is going to be a wetter dough as opposed to like a sourdough bread, which is more tough. And if you're kneading by hand, that will probably take 20 to 30 minutes. This will take 15 or 20. It's nice to have a mixture like this, but I went a lot of years just mixing by hand. And I like mixing by hand because you get a better feel of the dough and when it's ready. The texture of the dough is going to be a little wet, but it shouldn't be too sticky. You want it to look like one piece. You don't want it to be sticking to the sides. The good indicator of when you know your bread is done is obviously the window pane test, which is taking a piece of dough and then seeing if you could see through it or if it breaks. And then also making sure the sides of the dough aren't sticking to the walls of the bowl. So we're gonna run it for 10 to 15 minutes. Mixing with all the ingredients incorporated in here. After 5 minutes, I'm going to scrape it down, and 10 minutes, I'm going to let it rest in here and then let that gluten form and rest for a little bit. And then I'm going to turn it on for another 5 minutes. And then we're going to transfer it to a lightly oiled bowl so we could do our first bulk rise. So after letting this mix for 20 minutes, we let it mix for 10 minutes and we let it rest for 5 minutes and then we let it go for another 5 minutes. What you want this dough to look like while it's going is you want to hear a popping noise and you want it to make it look like a bow, and then also all the sides are not stuck to the bowl. So what we're going to do, we're going to transfer this to this container, it's going to be our first bulk proof. Right now, I'm going to lightly oil this container so that it doesn't stick. And then also I'm going to oil my hands just a little bit. Cool. All right. So we have a nice dough right now. I already see the bubbles forming, which lets me know the yeast is working. So yeah, we're just going to transfer it to this guy. The dough is nice and smooth. All right, so I'm just gonna take out, there's some stuff inside. I'm just gonna scrape it out. All right. And so you don't want the dough to look like this. You want it to be all formed into one big mass. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna fold it over again, fold the side. So since we oiled this, it's not sticking to the container. And then this is a really easy dough to work with. It's a Pandesal dough. So I don't need to touch this again. And I just let this rest for 1 hour room temp, and then you throw it in the refrigerator for at least 1 hour. You could do it overnight if you want. That's what I usually do. It develops a richer taste. All right, so we got a nice dough right here. And then what I do for good luck is I just like pat it. And then we just set this aside, room temp, let it rise for 1 hour and at least 1 hour in the fridge. All right, so now that our Pandesal dough has been sitting for an hour, we're gonna now transfer it to the fridge and let it rise there. The fridge allows it to stop the gluten production because we don't want it to rise too fast. So I'm just punching it down, releasing the air bubbles so it doesn't rise too quickly. So now it's gonna re-rise in the fridge for at least 1 hour. And then we'll come back to it and then form our pandesals. All right, let's put in the fridge. Okay, so our Pandesal dough is done. As you can see, it doubled in size. So what we're gonna do before we work on it, we're going to punch it down and then we're gonna roll it into 2 logs. So I'm just gonna get all the bubbles out. Just make sure all the bubbles are out. All right. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna lightly flour the surface. You don't wanna over flour it because you don't want the dough to be too hard, too tough. With this bench, I'm just going to scrape it out. This should come out clean. This is a Filipino technique called paston, which is just rolling it into a log. All right. I like to flatten it out a bit more. All right, so this is the paston part, which is just the process of rolling it tightly into a log. And then you're gonna do it cut side down. We need more space. All right, so that's one. Now we're gonna do the second one. I'm just turning it tightly, kind of like what you would do for a cinnamon roll, but make it super like tighter. And the reason why we do this in the Philippines, what they do is they don't even weigh it out. They just cut it. So what they do is they just cut it into so many pieces, and they're just like uniform. But I don't have that type of skill level as the bakers in the Philippines, so I like to weigh it out mine, so I'm sure that each one looks more uniform. So now we got our 2 logs. So now we're going to weigh them out into 100-gram pieces. We're also going to make a variation of pandesals with different fillings, and then we'll show that later, but right now we're gonna weigh them out. So I kind of just divide it. I just eyeball it. I'm probably going to adjust the measurements and add more, add less dough with each one. They could be over, they don't have to be exactly 100 grams. It could be a little bit over by like 10 grams. My favorite type of pandesal is the pan de coco. It's the first recipe I veganized along with the pandesal. I make my pan de coco a little bit differently. I add a little bit of our house ube halaya to it. And halaya is made using ube, like actual ube, and then also coconut milk and sugar. But we add sweetened coconut milk, and we make our own sweetened condensed coconut milk. And that is just made by cooking sugar and coconut milk together and just cooking that down and reducing it for a lot of hours. I think it's worth it though. And then pandesal translates to bread of salt, which originated from Spain. This was formulated back in the 1700s in the Philippines when we were colonized by the Spanish. It started off as a whole wheat bread, but since wheat isn't grown a lot in the Philippines, we had to use a weaker flour. The pandesal that we know today is going to be softer and chewier and fluffier. To veganize this, it actually wasn't hard for me to veganize just because when I started baking, I was already vegan, so vegan baking is all I know. What makes it hard is getting it to taste just like it tastes growing up. A lot of compliments we get is just like, you can't even tell it's vegan. In regular pandesal, you use dairy milk, and then you also use egg. We don't use any egg. In fact, we don't even have an egg replacer. It's just sugar, milk, water, flour, salt, butter. I like making bread because it's very cathartic. There's not a lot of thinking involved. You kind of just go through the motions. You get to just focus on this for a while. So meditative. I love it. Growing up, my mom didn't bake. She was a big cook. She's from Pandesal, and people from that province, they cook. They're big cooks, but not so much bakers. So I didn't grow up with a lot of bakers in my family. So growing up, I was like the middle child, so I wanted to rebel everything. I wanted to be everything. I know it sounds wrong, but I wanted to be everything my parents weren't. So that's why I thought baking was cool, because like they didn't even touch baking. We didn't touch the oven. The oven was used as like storage. So I was just like, oh, if I use this oven, maybe it'll make them mad. So I started using the oven, taking out all our storage blankets from the oven, and just started baking. But when I started baking, it wasn't like from scratch. It was just like, oh, I want to use this box recipe from Betty Crocker, which are really low-key, really good recipes though. The first person to tell me that they really enjoyed my baking that I cared about was my partner. He's Filipino, and so I think just getting that validation from him was really cool. Because it's hard to like figure out if my stuff tastes like the actual thing. Growing up, there's no such thing as veganism or like veganizing food. So especially pandesal, it's hard to tell like if something's close to what I remember. So now that we have everything weighed out, we're going to shape them into balls. So it's this action, we're just rolling it like that, and then we're rolling into balls. And that's good. So what we're doing is folding inwards, and then we're rolling it onto the surface into a ball. All right, now that our pandesals are all weighed out and rolled out, we're gonna line the pandesals on a sheet tray, and we're basically just coating the pandesals. We're gonna place them super close together, so I'm just rolling these in breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are essential for pandesal because it gives it that nice texture when you bite into it. We're lining it super close together, and it's going to rise like a pull-apart Hawaiian roll. So I brought pan de coco filling, black sesame, and then ube halaya. So we're gonna make different iterations of pandesal. So I did pop-ups once a month in New York. There wasn't, at least back then, there weren't a lot of vegan events, but I would always go to this really dingy bar that would do this thing called vegan shop up every month. Then I made a few friends there, and I was kind of inspired by all the food I was eating there. That was my first pop-up event I ever did, and that's the first time I ever sold, was in this dive bar in Bushwick. And like no one knew what ube was at the time, or like Filipino food at the time, and the vegan scenes, at least back then, was very white dominated. So it's just like no one knew what any of the stuff I was making was. I was kind of scared it would just be too foreign for everybody, but it worked out. So this is our tray. I'm gonna cover it with a towel. I don't think one is enough. Yeah, one's not enough. All right, and then we're gonna set this aside. Okay, so with the rest of the pandesal balls we have left, we're gonna make one with a pan de coco that's made with using ube, coconut, and sugar and butter. It's super good. And then this is our house ube halaya. So this is made with our ube, coconut, and sugar, and sweetened condensed milk. And then this is our black sesame paste, which we use grinding black sesame, toasted black sesame, and a little bit of butter and sugar in there. All right. So first we will make the pan de coco, and this is just to show you how versatile pandesal is. It's made with a lot of breads in the Philippines. Like I said, pan de coco, ensaimada, Spanish bread. So right now I'm kind of flattening it out for the pan de coco recipe. So we're just gonna put a tablespoon of this filling in each one of it, and we're gonna pack it down. Oh, I brought just enough. Okay, so we're just going to pull the end parts and just cinch it closed and put it down. Pull apart, bring around. This one's gonna be spaced further apart because they're a little bit bigger. But pandesals, they're supposed to be like pull aparts. The pan de coco is gonna be super coconutty because we use coconut for that, the filling. And then this black sesame is going to taste black sesame-y. And then the ube one is going to taste ube-y. So ube is going to taste like taro, but it's more nuttier and you're going to get more of a vanilla taste. And then black sesame is going to have like a very reminiscent taste of tahini. This one's made with sugar, so it's sweet, on the sweet side. We're just going to put a bunch into it. And we're going to shape this like a ensaimada. Ensaimada is a spiral brioche loaf. It's usually just filled with butter, but we're going to use black sesame. I wholesale pandesals to this coffee shop, and I kind of have free reign with them to create whatever type of pandesals I want. So whatever I feel like making that day is like what I'll deliver to them. And so I'll just like create things like this that I want to make because I love making pandesal. So I just wanted another avenue to make these. So yeah, that's how an ensaimada is shaped, like that. So what I'm doing is I'm just rolling it over. I'm cinching it, kind of like that baston log we made. And I'm rolling it longer. And then I'm circling it and pulling it tight and cinching it on the side. And now we're going to make one using our ube halaya. I'll shape these like a bun. So usually you just have one whole piece, but since we already have them cut, we're going to do them individually. So right now we're going to make pandesal with our house ube halaya. So what I'm doing is I'm just laying it down vertically to create the look of cinnamon rolls, but we're gonna do ube. When you do cinnamon rolls, it's usually just one long piece and you cut it up into pieces. But what I'm doing, since we already cut it up into pieces, I'm just going to roll it up as if it's a cinnamon bun. So what I'm doing is just rolling it up like that. And then cinching it closed. These are more like ube buns. And we should be good with these. So I just separated it into, these are pan de cocos, these are black sesame ensaimadas, and these are ube bombs, we'll call it. And so we'll cover these. We'll set these aside to rise a little bit. So we just waited 20 to 25 minutes for this to rise. So let's reveal them. So they should have almost doubled in size, which they pretty much did. So the way to tell is by touching it. And if it comes back slowly, you can see you don't want it to come back too fast because that means it's overproofed. You want it to bounce back slowly. So we're gonna pop this in the oven for 20 minutes. If you're at home, you could do 350 degrees. It might take longer than 20 minutes because those ovens tend to not distribute heat as well as this nice oven right here. So our filled pandesals are ready to go in the oven. We're gonna put them in for 350 degrees in the oven for 20 minutes too. Our pandesals are ready. They've been sitting in the oven for 20 to 25 minutes at 350 degrees. So let's take them out. Oh. All right, these are the regular pandesals and these are the ones with the fillings. We're gonna let these pandesals chill for about 10 minutes and then we're gonna go eat them. On this platter is our pandesal, the OG regular pandesal. The pan de coco, we'll open that up so you could see it. Our black sesame ensaimada, and our ube bun. I'm just gonna pull it apart so you guys could see how fluffy it is. Oh my God. It's super soft and pillowy. It's kind of like a King's Hawaiian if you had it, those Hawaiian rolls. And this is the pan de coco. So let's rip this open. This has the buttery coconut ube filling. This is the one with the black sesame paste. Let's open it up. Ooh, yes. Getting black sesame filling all throughout. This has the ube halaya. Yum. All right, I think I'm gonna eat this black sesame paste actually. I haven't had black sesame in a while. Yeah, so you're gonna get like a toasty sesame taste to it. It tastes like tahini kind of, but on bread, it's so good. And our paste is a little bit more coarse, so there's a little bit more texture. All right. Oh yeah, this is my favorite right here. This is the first thing I ever made, and I know why I still make it. That one's bomb. So I'm gonna finish eating all of this, and thank you for coming, and happy baking, everybody.